Let's bring in our guest now. Naitore Nyamu is the head of Physicians for Human Rights. She joins us now on the line. Good morning, Naitore.
Good morning, Eric.
Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the Situation Room. So let's start off by understanding what Physicians for Human Rights does. Who are you?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a pleasure to be here. So Physicians for Human Rights is an international non-governmental organization that uses science and medicine in all its interventions and approaches. And more so, when you look at cases of sexual and gender-based violence, we look at how can we use science and medicine and the law to ensure that there is concrete evidence that is collected, concrete evidence that is documented, and concrete evidence that is presented to court to ensure that there is justice for the survivors of sexual and gender-based violence and accountability for the perpetrators who are committing these crimes.
So who are you? Are you doctors?
So Physicians for Human Rights was established by doctors, but our organization has both doctors and lawyers, all professionals, because as you know, when it comes to cases of sexual and gender-based violence, we require a multi-sectoral approach in addressing the gaps, in addressing some of the challenges in implementation of the laws. Personally, I'm a human rights lawyer, but I work with other colleagues who are in the medical profession, communication, who are in who work as psychiatrists, counselors, etc., etc. Yeah.
What are the challenges? Some of the challenges, the glaring challenges that are encountered in collecting evidence in cases of sexual violence?
Numerous challenges, Eric, and this starts right from when the violation occurs. The advice that we normally give and the awareness that we are trying to create is that should you be in the unfortunate event that you are sexually violated, please go to a medical or healthcare facility within 72 hours. Those 72 hours are very crucial when it comes to collecting evidence, when it comes even to getting the requisite medical care for any survivor of sexual violence. But the challenges are at times because either survivors are not aware of what they ought to do. Some of them even immediately take a bath because these are heinous violations. You want to be done with it. They take a bath, and in the process of that, evidence is lost. Others maybe may store the clothes that they were wearing when the violation took place in a bag that tampers with the evidence, or when evidence is collected at the healthcare facility, then it's not stored well, it's not documented well. We've seen instances where the forms that are used in collecting evidence, the post-rape care forms, are not well filled, they're not articulately filled. And when such forms or documents come to court, then they are missing links, they are missing gaps. We see instances where Part B of the form is not filled in. The PRC form has both Part A and Part B, and the Part B contains the psychosocial support or psychological assessment of the survivor. We've seen instances where that form is left blank. And the moment that such forms are left blank or such areas are left blank, then that has a huge impact in terms of the evidence that's brought in court, in terms of what the judge or the magistrate has to use when it comes to making a determination.
Looking at the law and what it requires, Naitore, now, there seems that, unfortunately, there are quite a number of people who have been deemed as criminals. But if we want to look at it properly, what is being suggested now, that they could then fall in the category of victim, right? So even now, in collecting all of this evidence and trying to, build a case where this kind of violence does take place, for you, because you're obviously involved in this conversation when it comes to the amendment of the Act, of the Sexual Offences Act, where do you see the problem areas are here and the gray areas that need some ironing out for those who would be criminals but fall in the space of victims, perhaps?
So the Sexual Offences Act is an act that was enacted in 2006. I think because of the implementation that has taken place or has not taken place, there is need to re-examine after between 06 and let's say 2020, what has happened, what's working in that act and what's not acting. So I totally believe there's need to re-examine or amend this statute. One of the major issues that has come out as a result of the judgment that we are getting from court is as far as Section 8 is concerned. Section 8 speaks to defilement, and it terms defilement as penetration, any offense that leads to penetration of the genital organs between a child, a minor. And our laws define a minor as anyone below the age of 18 years. Now, in the last couple of years, there have emerged numerous cases of two minors, either between a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, and what I believe ought to happen, even as we seek to have the laws revised or amended, is at the moment is each case that comes to court should not have a blanket decision. The judges or the magistrates ought to look at the situation of each case by case. The issue of consent is another key problem in as far as the Sexual Offences Act is concerned. And for me, before even we say whether minors can consent or cannot consent, we need to first of all interrogate whether minors are in a position to understand what consent is. Because Section 42 of the Sexual Offences Act defines what consent is. It's agreeing by choice and having that mental capability to understand the consequences of the choices that you're making. Are our adolescents, teenagers in a position to consent, especially in Kenya, whereby we've absolutely buried our heads in the sand when it comes to comprehensive sexuality education? We've not done that as a country. We've refused to do it, yet we've seen what's coming out of that. So I personally believe that at the moment, minors do not have the incredible information. They've not gone through a comprehensive sexuality education to get to a point where they know what consent is. But it's sexual relations between adolescents. But sexual relations between adolescents is a reality, and we need to address it in the right way.
You know, I hear what you're saying, and if I were to just speak anecdotally, I would agree with you. But if you talk about sexual education, if we just leave the adolescents and the young people for a while, are adults in this country, would you say that generally they have a comprehensive understanding of sexual education on which to base their decisions on? Is sex a subject that adults freely discuss among themselves, not with their children? Is sex a matter that adults will actually honestly want to talk about and look at? Or is it something that you would rather somebody else discussed on your behalf, or you'd rather it was spoken of in the dark? Because what the parents believe will affect what the children know.
Totally. I'm in agreement with you.
Okay, I've just begun. I was actually continuing.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted you to agree with me first before I go on to the next point. Thank you very much for agreeing with me. The point I want to raise is this. When we look at the discussion of sex, sexuality, children, and their understanding, if you look at HIV and AIDS and everything that pertains to it, young adolescents, women specifically, who had engaged in sex and who perhaps acquired the virus through sex, some who even had children, there is a space that was provided for them and they were referred to as mature minors. And they were allowed to make decisions. They didn't need the consent of the parents. Now, I am simply saying that that understanding was arrived at when you realize this person has a child, they are under the statutory age, and yet everything about them conforms to what you would expect from an adult. As for understanding, now this is where the conundrum comes in. What is the benchmark? What is this thing that we must look for and confirm and determine before we say somebody has the capacity to actually give consent? What is it?
Naitore, may I kindly request that you respond to this after this break, because we need to go to a break now at 25 minutes past 8 o'clock. Kenya's biggest conversation. We are speaking with Naitore Nyamu, Head of Physicians for Human Rights Kenya. We are talking about the Sexual Offences Act. Everything around it. Time for amending it. What areas need to be amended? what else needs to happen to make sure that, it's not just about the law. We need to actually fight the rising cases of sexual offenses in our society. What is it that needs to happen to address the challenges that we are facing? We're talking about the Sexual Offences Act. So what is it that needs to stay? What can be changed? And then how do we address all the issues that come out with regards to sexual offences in the country? There's the issue of evidence gathering. There's the issue of supporting the survivors of sexual offences, even beyond taking people to court, the perpetrators to court. How do we ensure there is justice beyond that and there's support for the survivors beyond that? As we went to the break, Mr. Muga, sir, you were asking Naitore a question. Maybe you could just repeat it in summary so she can just remember and to realign with her answer.
She remembers very well. I'm going to ask if she remembers. Then if she doesn't, then I will then ask the question again.
No, I can answer.
Yes.
Please.
For us to get to that point,
Yes.
we need to first make sure that the adolescents or the teenagers, all the minors, are in a place whereby they fully appreciate the decisions that they are making and the impact of that decision that they are going to make. And this will come by a lot of awareness creation, a lot of sensitization. At the moment, many adolescents have access to the internet, online information, and these are some of the things that can be used to ensure that adolescents are well equipped to make a decision before we even think about amending or lowering the age of consent. But just to come back to your earlier conversation around adults, whether they also speak about sex or not, the comprehensive sexuality education, it's not something can be left alone to the teachers in school. It also has to be done by parents. Parents ought to be the authority for their teenagers or the adolescents, but that cannot start when these people turn 14 or 15. It has to be gradual. It has to be age-appropriate, comprehensive sexuality education, so that whatever the teachers do are complementing what the parents or the guardians are doing at home.
I understand fully what you're saying. You see, the reference I was making, and you're spot on, was to our social or cultural norms that in many, many ways are often a hindrance to discussing matters around sex. Our whole perspective on how sex should be managed and how it should be discussed and everything around it. And even though we are in the 21st century, some of these norms still bind us very strongly. Now, what I would venture to say is that when we talk of adolescents, you may find that their understanding of sex or education around sex is perhaps more explicit than even their own parents, because they have exposure to information in a way that their parents never had. And they consume this information and they talk among themselves. And one of the things that they will certainly not do, they will not often tell their parents exactly what they know. So there's a gap here that needs to be bridged if the things surrounding this particular topic have to be understood. Because one, there's a topic you have with children generally, then there's a topic that must be had with the girl child and the boy child. Who is it who communicates to the boy child that this issue of rape is something that should never even feature in their minds? Who is it that teaches them how to respect women? You start by respecting maybe your sister or girls. Who teaches this? Is it the parents? And if it's the parents, who takes the key role here? Is it the mother or is it the father? Now, I bring this in because African families, by and large, you will find that the mother plays a far more important role in bringing up the children than the father. And so they end up being a far more influential person in the lives of these children than the father. How do you bridge this?
Socialization of how the boys and the girls are socialized in the community plays a huge role.
Yes.
In the sense that a sex debut for a boy is seen as being a man or manhood. It's something that's celebrated. For women and girls, something that's frowned upon.
Yeah.
Such that you're not socialized, even like for the boys, they're not socialized or taught or educated that there are lines that you cannot cross when it comes to your sexual relations. That it needs to be very clear from the word go that any relation that does not have consent, or where there has been consent, then that is going to be deemed or to be criminal. I mean, that's what our laws are providing. And in terms of whether it's the mother or the father who wants to do that, I think both of them ought to do that. We cannot, yes, our African culture is there, but we cannot continue using that as a reason as to why the adolescents, the teenagers that we have, are not getting the right education. Previously, issues such as female genital mutilation were conversations that could not be had in public. But now we are seeing even elders in places where female genital mutilation is practiced are the ones who are coming to the forefront to say that we need to deal away with this retrogressive practice in our community because of the numerous implications that it has on the lives of our girls and children. The same way that we've gotten to a point whereby those who are practicing or those who believe in this practice are speaking against it, is the same thing that we can do for cases of sexual violence or defilement. Let it be said that for a man or for a boy, respect a woman or a girl, not because they are your sister, your mother, or your cousin, but because because you ought to respect them as a fellow human being. And also the socialization for the boys that having sex or with this anyone or everyone makes you a man. There are some of the practice or the norms that we need to rewrite and re-educate the boys, and the girls also need to be educated in terms of what is consent to them. Because one of the things that we were proposing in terms of amending the Sexual Offences Act are the Romeo and Juliet clauses. But before we get to those, introducing the Romeo and Juliet clauses into our laws, we need to be at a place whereby there is the adolescents are in a position to appreciate the decisions that they are making, because sexual encounter is a decision that they have to make, and it's one that has a lifelong impact in terms of their lives. Yeah.
So I hear you. Are you almost saying then that the sexual education must be made mandatory then across the country? But then it would seem as if those then who teach also must be taught once again, because even I'm horrified in some of the things that I hear adults teaching young children about sex. I'm truly horrified to hear some of the untruths then that are being passed on to children. So if we're saying then in order to change this law, there are certain prerequisites that then must come into place. But even those then that would feed the information, seems to me that there needs to be a total retraining in that aspect as well, whereby we're still not even comfortable to have these discussions. But then we're getting into a place where we're getting entangled with the law, and then young people are getting in trouble because they do not know, or even if they do know, it has not been explained to them in a proper way. It just seems that there's this whole ball of confusion that needs to be sorted out on so many different levels. How do we tackle that?
There's need for retraining, and we will look at most of the schools whereby what we refer as counseling teachers. These teachers are teachers who are deemed they have a better relationship with the students or the pupils, but most of them are not. Most of them either have the requisite skills to offer the relevant counseling or the relevant advice or guidance. And I'm saying this with all due respect to the teachers who've taken up this role, because of numerous reasons. We've not gotten the skilled teachers who have those counseling skills, who can offer the requisite psychosocial support. Now, for comprehensive sexuality education to be introduced in schools, and it ought to be introduced like yesterday, the curriculum needs to cater for all ages. Yeah, it needs to be age appropriate. It needs to uphold the best interest of a child. It needs to be backed up from a human rights perspective. And the teachers who are doing this also need to go for training. We've done this before in many other instances. We've seen the massive investment that the government has taken in as far as information around COVID-19 is concerned. We've seen the same thing in as far as HIV and AIDS is concerned. There were billboards everywhere, there are pamphlets or booklets everywhere on the same. We can do the same for comprehensive sexuality education, and it would start with the teachers who are giving it doing the same. But also parents need also to go through some sort of schooling in terms of educating, informing their children on what is sex education, what does it entail. Age appropriate should be one of the cornerstones for any education that we are offering the teenagers or the adolescents. But what we need to recognize and realize, and I would like to underscore this as much as possible, before we get to that discussion of lowering the age of consent, let us first of all make sure that these other aspects are in place, that the adolescents have the right information to make any informed decision. I know the biggest debate has been comparison in terms of what other countries are doing or what other countries have done in terms of the age of consent is concerned. But we have a stark difference. Those other countries have put in place comprehensive sexuality education. They have support services for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. To date, still, most survivors of sexual violence do not get psychosocial support. And any case of sexual violence traumatizes this survivor, even an adult. You can now imagine what sort of traumatization that minors go through when they are sexually violated. And the Sexual Offences Act it's an incredible act by all means, because it also protects minors and adults at the same, but more so for minors, protects them from sex predators who may not think through before even they engage in any sexual relations with minors. So we need to strike a balance, protecting the minors, but also realizing that adolescents have their own agents. As maybe the 14, the 16-year-old, the 18-year-old, and we can see the cases that have come in court and how they've been decided. Yep. We cannot continue burying our head in the sand as far as sexual relations among adolescents is concerned.
When you talk about the psychosocial support, which is a critical part of this, in terms of the support that is accorded to the victims, in the cases where we have children, and let's say we are just talking about now these adolescents and teenagers and who are involved and engaged in sexual acts, what kind of handling should they get? Let's assume that yes, we have even enacted the Romeo and Juliet clauses, but what kind of psychosocial support should these children get? Because remember, by the time it becomes an issue, it means that what they were doing and they were not doing it publicly has come to light as young children, and it has come to the attention of everybody in the society. It will also likely traumatize them going forward.
Psychosocial support is one of it's the key, it's integral for any survivor of sexual and gender-based violence, and more so for minors, because you cannot even bring a minor who has been violated to court to testify or to give them, to testify in that case when you've not offered the psychosocial support because they are still traumatized. So number one, the psychosocial support should start the moment they visit a healthcare facility, a hospital. They should be allowed to see a counselor or a psychosocial expert who will take them through what they have gone who will guide them or just have a conversation with them on what they've gone through. And the sessions for psychosocial support, they ought not to be one, they ought to be a couple. And a counselor is in a position to evaluate how many sessions does a survivor of sexual violence need to get to a point where they've gotten some sort of healing, because some heal, others, some will take 1 year, 2 years to sort of get over that occurrence, but others may take 5 or 6 years. It depends on numerous circumstances. Additionally, when going to court, getting support system, when they are giving their testament in court, they need to be accorded the necessary support. Maybe someone, the counselor, could accompany them to court. And I've seen many judges and magistrates having hearing cases of minors in chambers, and that gives them some sort of comfort, not in the public spaces. So that gives them some sort of comfort. And the counselor who is seeing this minor ought to document and record the sessions and what are the key issues that these survivor of sexual violence has gone through, and whether they need additional sessions, whether they need additional support or medical care. So this support is continuous, depending on every case. It's a case-by-case basis.
There's something that keeps niggling at the back of my mind. The discussion always seems to be around lowering the age of consent. Is there discussion about raising the age of consent? And since it isn't discussed, is there something adverse or is there something against the thinking of raising it? Because we talk about 18. What if we said 21?
I personally haven't had conversations around raising the age of consent at this point. More debate and deliberations have been around lowering the age of consent to 16, perhaps. Those are some of the conversations that have been going on. The reason why perhaps there hasn't been any conversation around raising the age is because our laws prescribe 18 as the age of majority. That's when most people get more privileges and freedoms to vote, get a driving license, among other things. That's one of the things that has informed the discussions around lowering the age of consent.
You know, I understand that this particular topic is actually a complex one. And I don't think with time it's actually going to get less complex, especially in this information age where information is actually available at the tip of your fingers, literally. It won't get easy. But how then do we use this same technology that makes information so available? How do we make it an ally in ensuring that we reach this goal that is intended with these sort of discussions?
Flipping it, the same way we have messages that do not underscore issues around comprehensive sexuality education, we can use the same avenue to inform the adolescents who are, I believe, a majority of the consumers of the social media platforms or other online platforms, to educate them on sexuality, comprehensive sexuality education, what the laws provide for, because most of them are not even aware of what the laws provide or what the definition of defilement and what is Sexual Offences Act and what the impact of engaging in sexual relations with, whether between two minors or whether it's one adult and one is a minor. So using the same avenues, but in a more positive way. But secondly, to say issues around gender-based violence, they're not only a legal issue, it's a social legal issue. That's why community awareness, changing the social norms, takes a very long period of time. But we have to address them or try and cure this problem by approaching it not only from a legal perspective, but also from a social perspective. Ensuring conversations at the lowest form, whether it's in barazas, community forums, so that we don't leave a huge mandate to the teachers who are already overburdened by but they're trying to cover other topics or subjects in their curriculum. So a social legal approach is best suited to ensure that there's enough information, access to information in as far as the Sexual Offences Act is concerned and all other issues pertaining to the Act.
Let's open the phone line so we can get a couple of comments on this. 0719-012-600. We're having a conversation with Naitore Nyamu. She is the head of Physicians for Human Rights Kenya. We are talking about the Sexual Offences Act and all the facets of the Sexual Offences Act, and also sexual violence as a whole and how we can address it in the society. 0719-012-600. I want to come back to the issue of the support that a victim of sexual offense should get at that initial stage. It has just happened. They are going through everything they are going through. And then you said initially that, within 72 hours, they should go to a health facility. Within those 72 hours, again, they should also be going to a police station to report. They should be seeking justice. They should be thinking about how to, you're just thinking, how do I cleanse myself from this and start forgetting? But what kind of support should they be receiving at this particular point, and to make their access to justice, their pursuit of justice, much easier? And that's a question I'm asking you, Naitore. I mean, what kind of support should they be getting?
Sorry, for a moment I thought we were going on. We are waiting for a call to get in. Yes. So what is very critical, Eric, in terms of support for survivors of sexual violence is going to the healthcare facility within 72 hours. Personally, I believe that's the most integral part. Reporting to the police, you can do it much later when you're in that mind frame of to report. What's very essential is the collection of the evidence within the 72 hours, and just making sure. Number one, what happens when you go to a healthcare facility within those 72 hours, you'll get a requisite medical attention, and also for girls or for women, you'll get a medication that might prevent a pregnancy. That's administered right away when you present yourself to the hospital and you indicate what you've gone through. You also get medical attention or a medicine to prevent any transmission of HIV and AIDS virus or any sexually transmitted disease. So you get that very critical attention within those 72 hours, and they are very, very essential. However, more often than not, that does not happen because of lack of information, but also accessibility of healthcare facilities or hospitals. And that now leads to other numerous complications. We've had cases whereby minors have been repeatedly violated, where they've been gang raped, or where numerous people have just defiled them over and over again. And we get women getting fistula. We get instances where minors have had to undergo intense operations that will have lifelong implications on their lives. So the guidance or the advice that we always give is try as much as possible to get to the hospital within 72 hours, because even at that point you'll also get referred to a counselor, someone who can speak to you. But also critically is this medical care that avoids pregnancy, or that can prevent pregnancy, or also the medication that prevents contradicting STDs.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So I mean, you're looking at, as you're talking about this, I mean, I think it weighs heavy then on the advocacy then that is necessary or that's required to get a lot of these things rolling. Another aspect of some of the things that we see, just as you mentioned, that there minors who are defiled repeatedly. They're those who then have to get constructive surgery to basically fix what repeated abuse has destroyed. But on the same time, when it comes to prosecution or looking at legal recourse for some of these victims, a lot of the times families get involved and don't want to take any kind of action because of tokens that may have been handed out to them. Looking at it from a legal point of view, what can be done to protect these victims? Because in as much as, nothing is done to the perpetrators, they then have to live a life, for the rest of their lives with that abuse hanging on their shoulders. Meanwhile, their parents have made a decision not to prosecute. What happens, or what can happen to protect them? Because there are numerous examples of those.
Kangaroo courts or out-of-court settlement has become the norm in certain instances when it comes to cases of sexual and gender-based violence. I would like to highlight that defilement is a criminal offense, meaning it's a crime against the state, crime against the republic. Therefore, this is not a case that ought, by all means, to be solved outside the court, or to be taken from a couple of elders or parents agreeing that because our daughter has been defiled, let's give you 20,000 shillings or 10, whatever amount of money. That shouldn't happen at all. In fact, it's an illegality, the fact that such things are happening. But are they happening? Yes, of course. Left, right, and center. They do happen. And what's even more outrageous is the fact that when these conversations are happening, the survivor, in this case, is not part of those conversations. Yeah, so it's people who sit down and decide what to be done, disregarding the violation that this survivor has gone through. One of the things that we really need to emphasize in our community is that defilement is a criminal case. We hardly hear whereby in cases of murder, people come together to try and resolve that.
Right.
Why are we doing this for defilement? It's because, one, we do not deem defilement as a heinous crime as a society or as a community. We think it's something that has happened in Mambo and Nyumbani, and someone said when we were starting this conversation. Those are family issues, which is not necessarily the case. The other thing that I want to mention is that a number of cases of defilement, the perpetrators are family members. It's a relative, someone you live in close proximity to. And this now leads to a lot of tampering of evidence, tampering with the witnesses when these matters come to prosecution. The other support that minors require are safe spaces, shelters, where they can be, as the matter is proceeding in trial, they're in a space whereby they are protected, they have a good frame of mind where there's no interference with those witnesses. But when you have to attend court trial today and you have to go back in the same home where you're living with the perpetrator, then access to justice just becomes a mirage because it cannot happen. There'll be a lot of intimidation, there's going to be a lot of influence, and more often than not, in those instances, you see that survivor, the next time there's a mention or a hearing in court, or when they are needed in court, they will not appear in court. Yeah.
Naitore, we want to thank you very much for speaking to us today. Thank you for all your contributions and the insights, and we hope to be speaking with you again in a couple of days' time as we continue this conversation, seeing how then this discussion and this debate moves from this point to the next level of either going back to Parliament so that the necessary amendments are made. But before then, to the best of your understanding, what are the steps that have been taken? We understand former Chief Justice David Maraga had formed a team. The Attorney General has formed a team. What's happening in this space?
Yes, that has much information that I know in as far as the amendment is concerned. I haven't seen a comprehensive bill that should be tabled to Parliament. Haven't seen one, but I know there are conversations with the AG at the moment in terms of amendments. I think early this year, the National Gender and Equality Commission also launched a paper on why the age of consent should not be lowered. So there are ongoing conversations and research around, around the issue. I think in the next year also we might be seeing a bill being tabled in Parliament after the consultations that are currently ongoing.
Asante sana, then have a lovely day.
Thank you, Naitore.